Norway stretches more than 1,800 kilometres from south to north. If you placed it on a map of the United States, the southern tip would sit near New York and the northern edge would reach past Miami. It has a coastline so fractured by fjords and islands that if you straightened it, it would wrap halfway around the Earth. 5 million people live here, fewer than the population of Singapore, spread across mountains, Arctic coasts, and some of the steepest terrain in Europe. And yet almost nothing about daily life in Norway feels difficult. Roads cross fjords through tunnels drilled into solid rock. Ferries run on schedule in winter storms. Remote fishing villages have schools, broadband, and public health care. Look at the map. Norway is barely wider than a highway in some places. A spine of mountains runs the entire length of the country. On the western side, the land is shattered. Fjords cut dozens of kilometres inland, some more than a kilometre deep. Roughly 50,000 islands scatter along the coast. The population density is around 15 people per square kilometre. Germany fits more than 15 times that number into the same space. And yet Norway's roads connect places most nations would have left isolated. Its tunnels number over 1,100 on the road network alone. The map looks like it was torn apart. The country works like it was carefully assembled. The question is how a country this extreme became one of the most functional on the planet. And to answer that, you have to start with the people who first treated these coastlines not as barriers but as roads. Before there were roads in Norway, there were sea lanes. The fjords that look like barriers on a modern map were highways for the people who first settled this coast. The same geography that splits the land into fragments also created thousands of sheltered channels between islands and headlands. For Viking-era Norwegians, a boat was faster and safer than any mountain crossing. The Vikings did not conquer despite Norway's geography. They conquered because of it. Centuries of navigating fjords, currents, and open stretches of the North Sea produced some of the most capable seafarers in the medieval world. The coast was not just a place to live, it was a training ground. By the 14th century, that coastal advantage had attracted outside attention. German Hanseatic merchants established a trading post at Bergen's Bryggen Wharf, turning the harbour into one of Northern Europe's most important commercial nodes. Bergen remained Norway's largest city for roughly 500 years, not because it sat at the country's centre, but because it sat at the edge of the sea. What most people do not realise is how young Norway actually is as a sovereign state. For centuries it was governed first by Denmark, then by Sweden. Full independence did not come until 1905, making Norway one of Europe's youngest countries, despite having one of its oldest continuous settlement histories. The coast had always connected its people. A shared government took much longer. That late unification left a mark. Norway did not develop around a single dominant capital the way France or England did. Identity formed along the water, in fishing harbours, trading posts, and island communities that were often closer to each other by sea than to any inland authority. The country's character was decentralised from the start, shaped by a coastline that made every settlement both isolated and connected. The coast built Norway's past. But the country that emerged in the 20th century had to decide what to do with a geography that remained just as extreme. The mountains had not moved, the fjords had not narrowed, and the new nation had to find a way to connect what the sea alone could not. Norway has a sovereign wealth fund worth more than $1.7 trillion. Walk through Oslo and you might not notice. There are no gold-domed palaces, no private towers announcing billionaire owners. Instead, the country built one of Europe's most expensive public libraries, Deichman Bjørvika, and made it free. The Opera House cost over $700 million. Anyone can walk on the roof. The government pension fund Global holds shares in more than 9,000 companies across 70 countries. It owns roughly 1.5% of every publicly listed stock on Earth. Divided equally, each Norwegian citizen's share would be worth over $300,000. The fund's offices in central Oslo look like any other mid-rise building. Norwegians have a cultural concept called janteloven. It is not a law, but it functions like one. Do not assume you are better than anyone. Do not show off what you have. In a country where petroleum revenue could have produced the world's most conspicuous wealth, the prevailing norm pushed in the opposite direction. Modesty became a civic value. The tram network runs on renewable electricity. More than 90% of new cars sold in Norway are electric, the highest share on Earth. Public parks are immaculate. Schools and hospitals are funded to the same standard whether the town has 50,000 people or 500. The money's everywhere. It just does not look like money. Oslo shows where Norway's money goes when it stays in the city. But the real test of that wealth is what happens when it has to cross mountains and water. The Sognefjord is 200 kilometers long and over 1,200 meters deep. That makes it deeper than most of the North Sea. And there is no bridge across it. Every fjord postcard is also a map of a transportation problem. The western coast is cut by hundreds of inlets, some narrow enough to feel like canyons, others wide enough to take an hour to cross by. Boat. For centuries, communities on opposite sides of the same fjord lived closer to each other in distance than to the nearest road. Norway's answer was to go through the mountains rather than over them. The country has more than 1,100 road tunnels, more than any other nation in Europe. The longest, the Lærdal Tunnel, runs 24.5 kilometers through solid rock, connecting two fjord valleys that would otherwise require a mountain pass closed by snow for months each year. Some tunnels run beneath the fjords themselves, dropping below sea level and climbing back up on the other side. The engineering is invisible from above. The landscape looks untouched. But beneath it, Norway has built an underground network that rivals any subway system in complexity. And then there is the railway. The Flom line drops 860 metres over 20 kilometres, passing through 20 tunnels and alongside waterfalls that fall directly beside the track. It was built not as a tourist attraction, but as a supply route to connect an isolated valley to the national rail network. But tunnels cannot replace every ferry. Norway still operates roughly 130 car ferry routes, many of them essential commuter links. In parts of the west, a 30-minute drive to work includes a 15-minute ferry crossing. School buses board ferries, grocery deliveries board ferries. The schedule of the boat shapes the rhythm of the day. And the government subsidises these routes as a matter of national policy, because without them, entire communities would be cut off. Norway is now planning its most ambitious infrastructure project yet, a coastal highway that would replace 7 major ferry crossings with bridges and tunnels, some of them floating beneath the surface of the fjords. The estimated cost runs into tens of billions of dollars. The fjords forced this country to build its way through rock. But the money that paid for all of it came from a very different landscape, one hidden beneath the seafloor further south. In the late 1960s, Norway discovered oil beneath the North Sea. Within a generation, one of Europe's poorest countries became one of the world's richest. The transformation started here, in Stavanger. Before 1969, Stavanger was a modest fishing and canning town. Then Phillips Petroleum confirmed the Ekofisk field, one of the largest offshore oil discoveries in history. Within a decade, Stavanger became the oil capital of Norway. Supply vessels filled the harbour. International energy companies set up headquarters along the waterfront. And Norway's economy changed permanently. Norway exports oil to the world and drives electric cars at home. More than 80% of new cars sold in Norway are fully electric, the highest share on Earth. Norway has over 1,600 hydropower plants. Mountain rivers and glacial meltwater fall through steep valleys at enormous speed. Roughly 98% of Norway's domestic electricity comes from hydropower. Not wind, not solar, not nuclear. Water. When oil revenues began flowing, Norway created a sovereign wealth fund. Today it holds over $1.7 trillion, more than $300,000 for every Norwegian citizen. The money is invested globally. It does not fund luxury, it funds patience. The tunnels, the ferries, the hospitals on remote islands, the broadband in fishing villages, the fund underwrites the infrastructure that makes Norway's difficult map livable. Norway signed the Paris Agreement. Norway leads the world in electric vehicle adoption, and Norway still drills. New exploration licenses in the Barents Sea remain politically contentious. Environmental groups argue the country cannot credibly lead on climate while expanding Arctic petroleum production. Supporters counter that oil revenue funds the very green transition critics demand. Neither side is wrong, and neither side has won. The oil paid for the tunnels, the ferries, the public systems, and the fund. But the communities that existed before the oil, the fishing towns along the northern coast, tell a different story about what Norway was. and still partly is. The Lofoten Islands lie above the Arctic Circle, yet small fishing communities still hold to this broken coast. What looks remote from the air is, on the ground, a chain of inhabited villages built around working harbours. At nearly 68 degrees north, Lofoten sits farther north than many people imagine, in the same latitude band as places that feel far less habitable. Warm Atlantic currents reach this coast and soften a latitude that, by geography alone, should feel much colder and far more severe in winter. The red cabins are not ornaments. They began as practical shelters built for fishermen, gear and life at the harbour. Up close, the architecture is simple, weathered and functional, shaped less by style than by the demands of the sea. Each winter, the boats return with the cod migration that has shaped Lofoten's economy for more than 1,000 years. Here, fish are not rushed into factories, they are hung outside and left to climate, air and time. Stockfish from these islands once became medieval Norway's most valuable export, moving this remote coast into European trade. Cold air, wind and patience do the preservation work here, using climate itself as the oldest processing system. The rhythm of the island still begins and ends with the harbour, where work returns visibly to shore. Even here, remote islands are tied together by roads, bridges and regular transport built against difficult geography. Public life continues in improbable places, with civic investment reaching even a football field on a tiny island. Schools, ferries and basic services make these settlements feel connected, not abandoned at the edge of the sea. Here, ferries are not scenic extras. They are part of the road network that keeps daily life moving. Lofoten proves that Norway's most dramatic landscapes are not empty. They are inhabited, maintained, and linked to the rest of the country. For roughly 2 months each winter, the sun does not rise in Tromsø. Schools open, buses run, restaurants stay full. Tromsø sits on a small island in northern Norway, 350 kilometres above the Arctic Circle, roughly the same latitude as northern Alaska. But this is not a survival outpost. Tromsø has a university, the world's northernmost, a cathedral, a brewery, and an international film festival. Around 77,000 people live here. That makes Tromsø larger than most Arctic settlements anywhere on Earth combined. From late November to mid-January, the sun stays below the horizon entirely. Daylight becomes a deep blue twilight that lasts a few hours at midday. You might expect this to produce widespread seasonal depression. Studies suggest the opposite. Tromsø residents report lower rates of winter distress than people at similar latitudes elsewhere. Researchers point to a cultural factor. Norwegians do not treat polar night as something to endure. They treat it as a season with its own rhythm: skiing, candles, outdoor life. Then in summer, the opposite. From mid-May to late July, the sun never sets. Midnight feels like late afternoon. The city runs a full-scale hospital, a public transit system and heated roads that keep the bus network functional through Arctic storms. None of this is cheap. Maintaining normality at 69 degrees north requires constant public investment, the same pattern visible all the way from Oslo. Tromsø is also where Norway's Arctic ambitions become visible. The city hosts the Norwegian Polar Institute and serves as a gateway to the country's northern strategic interests. From the outside, a city this far north looks like an anomaly. From inside Norway's national project, it looks like the logical next step. Tromsø is proof that Norway's national project reaches into polar conditions. But there is one more place, further north, further out, where the idea of Norway meets the edge of the inhabited world. Svalbard sits at 78 degrees north, roughly halfway between mainland Norway and the North Pole. About 2,500 people live in Longyearbyen, the world's northernmost permanent settlement with a population over 1,000. On Svalbard, it is effectively illegal to die. That is not a metaphor. Permafrost preserves human remains indefinitely, so burials have been prohibited since the 1950s. The seriously ill are flown to the mainland. For most of the 20th century, Svalbard existed for coal. Norwegian and Soviet miners worked opposite ends of the same archipelago. As the mines closed, the settlement reinvented itself around Arctic research, a small university campus and a careful form of tourism. What makes Svalbard truly unusual is a treaty signed in 1920. Under the Svalbard Treaty, citizens of more than 40 signatory nations can live and work here without a visa. This frozen archipelago, 1,300 kilometres from the North Pole, is one of the most internationally open territories on Earth. Buried in a mountainside outside Longyearbyen is the Global Seed Vault, a backup facility designed to preserve crop seeds from every nation against catastrophe. It holds over 1 million seed samples, with room for 4.5 million. Norway built it, the world deposits into it. Climate researchers on Svalbard measure some of the fastest temperature increases on the planet. The permafrost is warming. Glaciers that have been stable for centuries are retreating. At the edge of Norway's map, the questions stop being national and start being planetary. Svalbard is where Norway's map finally ends, and where the questions it raises become global. If a small, wealthy country can organise life at the edge of the habitable world, what does that say about what geography really demands? By now, the coastline no longer looks decorative. It looks like the central problem Norway had to solve. And the farther north the map extends, the clearer that problem becomes: distance, cold, and separation on a national scale. In the fjords, ordinary movement demanded tunnels, cliff roads, and engineering that most countries would never build. What feels routine to Norwegians often exists only because mountains were drilled through, again and again. Where roads could not continue, ferries became part of the road system itself, carrying daily life across water. Even small island communities kept schools, services and public access, not because they were easy to reach, but because they were included. In Oslo, national wealth appears less as spectacle than as calm public space, transit and restrained design. From the capital to the Arctic frontier, the same national choice repeats: keep the whole map connected. At the far edge of that map stands Svalbard, where Norway's reach extends into a place built around isolation itself. Nearly every kilometre costs more here, because roads must negotiate water, rock, weather and steep terrain. What outsiders read as postcard beauty is also a ledger of ferries, docks, tunnels and maintenance. The postcard is real, but the country behind it is more revealing than the scenery alone. Norway's beauty was never the whole story. The real story is the system built to make this difficult map livable.